Thank you. And Professor Bryson.
One of the big questions that I had to deal with in considering whether or not to accept the very generous offer, invitation of the University of Toronto to come here today would be the impact of this event on trans and gender non-binary people, specifically at the University of Toronto and much more generally. And so, whereas I would say that I recognize practices of peer review, and practices of peer review are not denouncement. Practices of peer review are practices that we utilize to make assessments about knowledge claims, whereas I would fully appreciate being able to enter into a discussion about gender and gender identity and issues around trans culture as a means of practicing peer review. I think the difficulty that we've had, and we've managed to reproduce this difficulty here today, characterized just now by Dr. Peterson as simplifying the world for functional purposes. Simplifying the world for functional purposes is not what I recognize to be academic practice. This is not how we relate to knowledge. And so I think that there's a concern when we don't subject claims that are being made as knowledge claims by people who carry titles at great Canadian universities.
Dr. Mary Bryson, thanks for your sage input. I know it's not what you think you said. It sounds to me like you're saying what's important is our feelings, not the academic rigors. And I'm going to place an example here of a talk on YouTube that you did about Facebook cultural norms and see if you are held to the same academic standards. The problem I'm getting at is that when some people make claims about their rights being interfered with or something they disagree with, then a lot of heated rhetoric is okay. But when it's something you disagree with, there has to be peer-reviewed literature and academic scholarship and science.
So I've been working at the University of British Columbia since 1988.
Oh, no, not that one. Here's the one I wanted to show you.
So I think that probably one of the more helpful ways of thinking about this is to think about it in terms of what people would talk about as critical media literacy. And so there's a notion that we need to both be very skilled participants in these spaces. It's not going to be helpful as a teacher or a parent or as a researcher to put on the blinders. This is a key cultural location, but there are some critical digital media literacy skills that we can take advantage of to be able to more reflexively, knowingly participate in these spaces. Take a look at what it is, basic critical digital media literacy. Who owns the message? What is the message that's being put out there, both in the more obvious terms and then if we look at it in slightly less obvious terms. And so on Facebook, for example, only 2 genders are possible for people to sign up, male and female. And there are lots of transgendered people who have asked for other options to be made possible that so far has not proven to be successful. And if you don't tell Facebook what is your gender in strictly binary terms, then you'll get another message from Facebook telling you, we don't really know how to deal with you. This could be a problem. So here's a really good example of where we have click box technology. We could have lots of boxes for gender. Instead, we're just keeping the 2 for biological sex. And so here's a really good example of how to take a look at what seems like a neutral kind of environment and see how is it shaping the way that people participate. How is it that people are being asked to define themselves? And why is it that this environment shapes the way that people participate in a very particular way?
All right, now we're going to get back to finishing what you were saying, and then Jordan Peterson responding to your comments.
When we don't treat those knowledge claims in the same way that we would in any other field, and when they're knowledge claims made about members of minority groups, embattled, vulnerable, marginalized members of minority groups, then I think that we all need to be very concerned about how it is that we're changing what we think we do in the university, which is supposed to be about the advancement of knowledge and excellence.
And please note that Jordan Peterson, when he responds as appropriate to his profession, not his feels, how he feels about things.
Thank you. So sort of a slightly different line, but back to you, Professor Peterson, again from the audience. As a clinical psychologist, is Professor Peterson, as a clinical psychologist, refusing to acknowledge how damaging it could potentially be to an individual to disregard their identity?
The first thing I would like to say to Mary Bryson is that this is an invitation. If she would like to debate, the relationship between biology and gender identity, I'm extending her an invitation to do so. I'm sure that any number of student groups would be more than happy to host it, and I'll put my knowledge of the peer-reviewed literature against her knowledge of the peer-reviewed literature.
Let's go to the question, though.
Identity is a very complicated thing, and when I engage in clinical discussions with my clients, it's all about their identity. And so the idea that it's a very difficult question to even engage with, because I don't understand it. It makes things so simple that you can't discuss them properly. All I do in my clinical practice, and I have about 20,000 hours of experience in my clinical practice, and I've dealt with all sorts of people, far more variation in people than the typical person ever encounters, and I think I've done it at least reasonably competently. All my discussions with people in my clinical practice are about their identity, given the definition of identity that I brought forth, how they feel about themselves, how they conceptualize themselves, because those are two different things, how that plays out in their interactions with other people, and what the functional significance of that is. And I'm going to say forthrightly, well, two things. One is that I don't believe that any of my clients have had cause to worry about my interpretation of their identity, because what I do in my practice is help them discover what that is. I'm seriously not interested in imposing any ideas of identity onto someone, because I can't do that. I don't know what the right vehicle is for you to travel through life. What I can help you do is articulate your concerns. I can ask you questions where I see contradictions in your self-articulation. I can help you make plans for the future. And I've helped thousands and thousands and thousands of people, by the way, make plans for the future with the stuff that I do online. And so I'm helping people build a genuine identity. And that's what I do. So that's the answer to that question, and I think I do it well. I mean, in the stuff we've done from a research perspective with the Future Authoring Program, which I offered to people free a week and a half ago to help them catalyze their identities, we've helped 5,000 university students increase their grade point average 20% and decrease their dropout by the same. And the biggest effect has been with men and non-Western ethnic minority students who've accelerated their performance up beyond the range of the normal for the dominant culture. A pure psychological intervention, I might say, and not a sociological intervention. So I'm perfectly willing to stack my record on identity formulation up against anyone's. And I should also point out that I think where I'm most vulnerable in this entire debate, and I expect this will happen, and there's already been noise about it on the Ontario Psychological Association website, I think they'll probably come after my clinical license. So that'd be my guess. So
I think we might be straying a little away from the question now. So thank you.
No, we're not, because that question involved my clinical practice. I'm not straying a bit. That involved my clinical practice, and there was a reason that the question was posed. So I'm not straying.
Thank you.